But what you do, you treat it for what it is, a thought. So you might teach a client to say, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, as opposed to I'm not good enough, I'm buying into it.
Damien, welcome to the Success Mindset YouTube channel, and I'm delighted to be joined again by Nick Barratt. How are you, Nick?
Hi, Damien. I'm very well.
And today we've got Nick's expertise in looking at self-management and building positive behaviours. And I know, Nick, your background is very much focused around supporting people with behaviours and understanding of behaviours. So, Nick, in your experience, why do people have negative behaviours and feelings? Why do we have them as human beings?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. One is that over many thousands of years, we've evolved to be quite analytical, to be on the lookout for threats, and we can understand why that was of great survival value in the early days of our species. But what can happen is that we can apply that threat assessment, that analysis, to lots of everyday situations. So social interactions, we can turn that same analysis inwardly on ourselves, which can lead to us maybe being a bit over-analytic, a bit self-critical, maybe questioning why we did what we did, maybe questioning the motives of other people. So whilst it's something that obviously is can be of great use to us still in certain situations, that threat assessment, that analysis, can also lead to some problems as well.
And and I totally get what you're saying there, Nick, because I think we live in a world now where we haven't got saber-toothed tigers anymore ready to run into our cave and eat us. Yeah. And it did serve that purpose because the freeze, fight or flight mechanism in our bodies would protect us. It helps us stay alive longer, being more attuned to what might hurt us, as opposed to doing stuff that might be in our best or better interests. And we live in a very, very different world now, but we still take on threats that might be not being able to pay the mortgage, and that causes a stress and a build up in our body. Or it might be an argument with someone at work, or someone cutting us up on the road if we're driving on a motorway. So why is it important to recognize these feelings and behaviors in order to be able to change them? Why is the actual understanding and our own recognition so important in behavior change?
Because unless we understand what it is that's driving our behavior, it's unlikely that we're going to be able to change it. And a lot of this threat assessment, a lot of this thinking, this forming stories around what's going on, is done just below our awareness. It's not something that we are consciously looking at. So it really is essential to become more in touch with what it is that's going through our minds. So there are theories that hold that a lot of our psychological distress actually comes from our attempts to deal with these negative thoughts, rather than just accepting them from what they are and being aware of them. And particularly with regard to your question, what can happen is something that it is a phenomenon where we fuse with whatever that negative thought is. So that means we take it literally. So, for example, if there's someone who has low self-esteem, who maybe thinks that they're not good enough for whatever, it might be relating to a relationship, it might be that they're not good enough to get that dream job, no one would ever hire them. What they can start to do is actually treat that thought as literal truth, as reality. So what a strategy that can be helpful, and this is something that comes from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is diffusion. So you don't try to change the content of the thought. That's actually one what can be seen as leading to some problems. But what you do, you treat it for what it is, a thought. So you might teach a client to say, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, as opposed to I'm not good enough, I'm buying into it. And that, if you think about the importance of a strategy like that, that can be the difference between someone going for and getting that dream job, so their life moving in a valued direction, or actually not, actually fusing with the thought, believing it, and not moving forward.
Absolutely. That awareness is really important, because if you're not aware, you can't change it.
Exactly.
And I know that you've got tons and tons of experience over the years, Nick, of working with various people around behaviour change. And I was just wondering if, just to give a sense to people watching this video, if you could give maybe a confidential example of how you've supported people to change maybe what might be deemed a negative behaviour to become a more positive behaviour.
So I worked with a young woman many years back around anger management, and she was someone who, if people said something to her that she perceived as criticism, she could end up raising her voice, swearing at them, sometimes storming from the room. And this was something that was getting in the way of her moving forward in her life in many ways, relationships, certain jobs that she wanted to do, and she knew, she recognized this as a problem, and it was really holding her back in lots of areas. So using a behavior analytic approach, the key is to first understand the situations in which those behaviors are more likely to occur. So we did that type of assessment. This was done very much with her. It's all very much a collaborative approach. And we identified that there were, it was more likely to happen in group situations. She could maybe tolerate what she saw as criticism a little bit better if she was on her own with someone, but not always. So once we identified that, we worked on coming up with some alternative responses, because that's what you're doing. And we talked in another episode about a constructional approach. So you're not trying to, it's not so much that you're trying to get rid of certain behaviors. There are certain behaviors that you don't want to be engaging in anymore, but you do that by learning helpful alternatives. So what we did with her, and it's really important that the client comes up with their own alternatives with a bit of guidance. So she came up with a lot of alternative responses. So alternatives to raising her voice, swearing, storming out of the room. And these were things that she could say. Now, we've talked about assertiveness before. Some of those were assertive statements like, well, I see that differently. Let's agree to disagree. Okay? But it's not enough just to come up with the alternatives. Now you have to practice them. And that's key. So we use what's called a behavioural skills training approach there. And that's a 4-step process that starts with instruction. So that's being clear on what the scripts are, how you will use them. There's modelling. So in our one-to-one practice sessions, initially it was one-to-one, then we brought groups in. In our one-to-one sessions, I would model the correct response. So she would be the communication partner, the person that she would be speaking with. I would be playing the part of her, and I would respond in that calm but assertive way. I would give the alternative response. So I'm modeling the correct response. Then we have rehearsal. So instruction, modeling, rehearsal. She then practices giving the socially appropriate response. The 4th and final step in behavioural skills training is feedback. I would give her feedback on her performance. So it needs to be specific. What did she do that was absolutely correct? What could she do to make it even better? And you go round and round with this until the person is very fluent with this response. Then we practice it in a group situation, because the key is to make it as realistic as possible. And we practice a range of different types of perceived criticisms. You tend to start with those that probably would elicit a less explosive response. So you make it easier for the client initially, and then you work up to the types of comments that other people could make that would lead to the big behavioral reaction. So in that way, so very much about learning new skills, practicing them in a real life situation, and then going out and actually using them in real life. So here we use a post-intervention monitoring. So she would go out, she would take a notebook with her, and what she had to do was record opportunities to use these responses. And then we would talk about it at the end of the week. And there are two reasons for that. It's an opportunity for learning and for getting additional feedback from me. But also we know that if you want to change a particular aspect of your behavior for the better, it's more likely to happen if you monitor it. It's a phenomenon called reactivity. If you monitor it, it's more likely to happen.
There's various levels in there actually that are really clever, because you've obviously got the level where, you know, you become aware of your behaviours. She knew that she needed to change them from being negative to, or what we might perceive as negative, to a more socially accepted behaviour. I think you also mentioned, I don't think you mentioned the word explicitly, but it was around desensitisation around certain themes that might trigger her or cause her to react. And you said, you know, you build up over time. You start with stuff that's less likely to trigger, and then you move up to the big stuff that would normally elicit that response. And by that point, I guess she's pretty much desensitised. And because she's so now aware, and she can now, I guess, change her behaviour to be that more socially accepted, I mean, that's going to have huge impacts on her quality of life, her well-being, and the opportunities open to her in everyday life. And Nick, if there's any other takeaways that people watching this, because they could obviously listen to that example, and I'm, you know, people could listen to that, I could listen to that and put into effect elements of it straight away. Is there any other tangible takeaways you could tell people watching this that they might be able to do just to recognise their maybe more sabotaging behaviours to help them get to a place of more positive behaviours?
Sure. There's many people will be familiar with mindfulness-based approaches, or bringing their awareness to the present moment. And what can be a very useful exercise, a very useful way of becoming aware of what makes us tick, is to practice noticing your own thoughts, noticing the feelings and bodily sensations that run alongside them, and in particular applying that awareness to situations where maybe you're struggling a little bit. So as a takeaway, I would say practicing being aware of your thoughts. But here's the key thing: it's just noticing them without judgment, without trying to change them in any way. Okay, it's just identifying the internal context that's associated with a behavior that maybe you want to change.
Thank you, Nick. I think that's really useful. So I hope that you found this useful to people watching. Thank you very, very much to Nick for your time today, Nick. And we will see you next time at the Success Mindset YouTube channel. Make your life a masterpiece, my friends. Go out and execute, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.